Welcome to the EUCannaJobs Potcast. We're thrilled to have you with us as we dive into the latest happenings in the European cannabis industry. I'm your host, Andy Mannsfeld. EUCannaJobs brings together European cannabis companies and people looking for their next great opportunity in the industry. Today we have a special guest with us, Eric Boone. He also started off in the U.S. and found his way over to Europe and is involved in several interesting projects. And so we'll be talking about those in a second. Thanks for taking the time to talk again, Eric.
Thank you, Andy. I'm happy to be here.
Great. And thanks everyone else for joining us. So Eric, let's get started. Tell us a bit about your background, how you ended up in cannabis industry, and then how you also found your way over here to Europe.
Sure. Well, I guess I've always had a bit of an international flair, a flair for the international, shall we say, since I studied overseas in undergrad. I've always I guess planted the international bee in my bonnet. So I've always been somewhat global in my career. However, around 2008, 2009, I found myself crashing ungloriously out of the Moscow, Russia commercial real estate market, and found myself in Phoenix, Arizona, where I enrolled at Thunderbird School of Global Management to get my MBA. It was a really well-known school for international business. It's only focused strictly on that. And as fortune would have it, one of my fellow classmates at Thunderbird was a lawyer, a local lawyer by the name of Colleen Goodson, whose uncle was Tom Goodson, also known as Tom Forsad, the founder of High Times magazine and the general of the great hippie war of the 60s and 70s. So Colleen and I became fast friends, and she actually introduced me to some of her colleagues, and I went on to become to helm one of the first, through her, publicly traded medical cannabis related companies. So we're issuing press releases dealing with cannabis. I'm dealing with FINRA, trying to get WEED as my stock symbol. It was really early days stuff, really interesting. And so I was sort of inducted into the space, for better or for worse, by Cannabis Royalty. So it sort of put an activist feather in my cap and sort of married me to the industry in sort of a deep way. And here we are 15 years later. I'm still chomping at the bit, trying to move the pieces forward. So
Nice.
It used to be that being a specialist in cannabis and having a passion for international, that was a recipe for disaster. Like you couldn't even trade over state lines.
Right.
And here we are in 2024. The walls around prohibition are crumbling before our eyes. And someone who is both international and cannabis expert is very much in vogue right now. So I maybe was a little early to the game, but I feel as though we've maybe the world's caught up with people like you and me, Andy. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's kind of funny, that you still can't sell cannabis over state lines in the U.S., but
sure.
meanwhile, you're importing from South Africa, South America, Asia, Australia, everywhere into Europe. So.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not uncommon to see California product on sale in Thailand. So we're at an interesting point in the industry right now, which is one of the things that gave rise to some of the projects that we're working on here in Europe to try to lend some method to the madness when it comes to cannabis legislation. So, but yeah, I'm glad that that there are a number of us sort of making the sojourn over to Europe as their walls around prohibition, they really started to hit the next level of coming down with Germany legalizing on the 1st of April of this year. So
yeah, definitely.
We'll see how I anticipate an acceleration of the collapsing of the dominoes, but I'm frankly surprised that we haven't seen it move a little bit quicker than we have already. So I could be wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely in cannabis like that, and it's probably the most
Sure.
highly regulated industry out there. So it's hard to compare it to others, but it seems like maybe because of my time in Colorado and watching it all happen there, it seems like
Yeah.
you expect things to go faster, and then while it's happening, you're not surprised that it's going so slow. But then you're still saying, "Why is it going so slow?" So it's kind of
Yeah.
it's back and forth, and let's see how we look at it in 15 years. What our memory is going to be like about the time. But yeah, I mean, in Germany, yeah, it has been a hurry up and wait kind of thing with you know, no one expected it to really happen. And then the coalition government came in and said, we're going to do this. People didn't quite believe it. Then they pushed it, but then they got pushback from the EU, and so all this back and forth. Yet, I mean, they did legalize. No recreational market yet, but they're working on that. We might still see that. There's been some news coming out about that recently again that there's several cities are moving quite close to potentially having these pilot projects for recreational sales. So, could still happen this year. We'll see.
Yeah. Yeah, but then like Germany's commercial, resoundingly non-commercial approach to their recreational program, I think, caught a lot of the entrepreneurs in the space a bit off guard who were looking at Germany.
Yeah.
It did me anyway. So that was it'll be interesting to see how it progresses. Like there's never a dull moment. You think you understand what the next moves on the chessboard are going to be, and then you realize, whoa, maybe I'm not as good as I thought I was.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think Germany's going to stick to the non-commercial side of it as far as no advertising and
Mhm.
a lot of these other rules because it's really what they've done with tobacco. Um, Not alcohol as much, but alcohol advertising is also quite restricted. So I think
Sure.
Germany will stick to that. But you know, out of those types of rules come novel ways to do things. So people get creative about how they end up marketing their brand. Yeah, so
Yeah.
it sometimes can be funny and interesting and definitely innovative. So that's also nice sometimes. It'd be nicer if we could just advertise, but but yeah,
Yeah.
the way it is.
Yeah. That's going to be an uphill battle for many years to come. And there have already been enough irresponsible players in that regard that we've sort of been lumped in with some less than honest players or less than above board players. So
Yeah,
that's a tough one. Yeah. We don't want to have any sort of repeat of Joe Camel in the cannabis space, even though the two products are not even remotely relatable. Um, but you have had some instances of marketing toward kids for cannabis products, and that's not a good mix.
yeah.
They're
No,
a
I mean,
huge, yeah.
yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, huge proponent of cannabis, but at a certain age and a certain level of neurological development. So
All right. Yeah, no, you definitely still see it to this day in the U.S., even though the U.S. in many states, many places is a much more mature market than in Europe. But you still see to this day in Colorado, California, Washington, Oregon, the authorities going in and having to confiscate or close places down because they're selling basically what looks like candy,
yeah,
and no matter how many times companies are told you can't make your cannabis products look like candy because it can be mistaken for candy by children, they keep doing it, and it takes a while for them to get caught. And somehow, I guess the numbers seem to work out for them that it's worth the risk or the
yeah,
repercussions that they get. But I agree with you. I mean, there's plenty of adults who want the product. There's no need to market it to children. Yeah.
exactly,
Uh, well,
exactly.
tell me. So, when you
Sure.
came over to Europe for the cannabis industry, what kind of surprised you, or what was different about it compared to the U.S.?
Well, I mean, the being global and working in cannabis and hemp, it's sort of taken me all over the world. after leaving Arizona, I ended up in India for 2 years where we were working on vertically integrated hemp operation. That was even before the whole CBD craze. I was looking more at textiles. Then came back to the US where I was in Seattle and worked a lot more on the ancillary side, like the software support, analytics, things of that nature, while still, delving deeper and deeper into the advocacy end of the business, where, those of us who've been in the space for a long time, it becomes, there's a lot of passion behind the plant as well. It's not just,
Right.
Trying to explore commercial interests. There's a spirituality to the commercial pursuits in this regard as well that can't be understated. So Seattle really helped sort of knock that to the next level. And Seattle, along with Colorado, those are the two most mature markets. I mean, they both legalized their adult use programs in 2012. Washington always says, "Oh, well, our vote finished 20 minutes before," but Colorado says, "No, we implemented our program 3 weeks before." But I always kind of give them, more or less a tie with Colorado probably snapping that rope a little bit longer. But let's be honest, like Washington and Colorado are the two most mature pieces of legislation on the market. And I was deeply involved in legislative affairs. I actually am still actively involved in the Legislative Affairs Committee of the Cannabis Alliance trade group of Washington State, despite living here in Portugal, because it's fascinating to work on those laws. Like those are the ones we've had 10, 12 years now to see what went wrong, to try to fix them, to try to work those fixes through the legislative system, to see what works, to see what doesn't work, with at least within the context of Washington. And there's a lot of experience to be had, a lot of learning to be gleaned from experience like that. So with that sort of mindset in tow, looking at the opportunities on the European market, understanding Portugal is a bit of a unique launch pad insofar as they decriminalized all drugs 22 years ago, and I think it was 2002 that they decriminalized all drugs in that grand experiment, which has more or less gone really well, with some exceptions more of late. But I think that our timing as the cannabis industry is perfect for that evolving or devolving narrative, as we might look at it. So it's a really interesting time to have a much more mature and informed conversation around the cannabis plant, its hemp derivative, and what the implications are based on both of those. And, I think coming from North America with a decade and a half of experience, we are voices of, I don't really consider myself a subject matter expert coming in here to tell you this is how you need to do it in Europe. I'm more of a cautionary Cassandra who has been through so many storms and crucibles in the Arizona program, in the Washington program, in the Canadian program, like seeing all of these and frankly making a lot of mistakes. And I hope that our timing in coming over here to Europe is such that we can share the wisdom and lumps of those mistakes, and hope to save our European counterparts from making some of the same. Now, your original question, however, that was a long way of kind of getting back to this, was, what are the big differences between the U.S. program and the European program? And I sort of outlined that whole long-winded foundation to say, well, one of the big truths that I came over to Europe with is, the warning that, hey, listen, I understand you guys have these really good medical programs, but one thing that we understand from the United States and watching 24 out of 50 states implement a recreational adult use program is that medical programs do not survive the transition to recreation. And I sort of said that as almost like a gospel, as sacrosanct, that applies to Europe as well. And now 2 years into it, I'm backpedaling on that assertion quite a bit. I think that the medical markets and the way medical cannabis has been promoted in Europe is longer legged and different enough than what we saw in North America that I think that those two programs, if legislation is crafted mindfully, can be adequately bifurcated into two entirely separate markets, and that you could have a healthy and thriving medical market in the presence of a robust and profitable adult use market operating in tandem.
Yeah, I mean, one big difference here in Europe is compared to the U.S. on that side is, especially in Germany, for instance, like in Germany in 2017, the Supreme Court ruled that insurance companies have to pay for medical cannabis if it's prescribed and indicated. So insurance companies have been begrudgingly paying for cannabis. Around 40 to 60%, around 50% doesn't get covered. So they're actually trying to, with the new regulations, new laws, increase that to where it's easier to get it covered, or more difficult for insurance companies to decline those claims. So with insurance companies paying for it, that will mean that patients have a reason to go to their doctor and get a prescription, go through the hassle, go to a pharmacy and things like that. In the U.S., the only reason people got a medical card is so they could go to a dispensary. Now, once you have recreational, since insurance companies aren't paying for it anyway, all it is an extra step and an extra hassle.
Precisely.
A few places, I think, did it to where you had less taxes for the medical, I think, or something. So, but I'm not sure if that's still around or where that's even still applicable. So that might have been a reason, but in general, there was no point in going through the hassle. Yeah.
Interesting you should mention that, Andy, because that was one of the pieces of legislation that we actually passed in the last legislative session in Washington State.
Okay.
Was the removal of the excise tax, the 32% excise tax for people who are on a medical registry. But what you said is exactly the problem. I mean, here in Portugal, for instance, medical cannabis is dispensed through the pharmacies. So if you want to get your medical cannabis, you go through the pharmacies. In the United States, there would be specific dispensaries for medical cannabis, and then recreational programs come in. A lot of these medical dispensaries would upgrade their licenses to be recreational as well. They'd maintain their patient registry, then realize it's somewhat tedious to follow those extra steps, as you said. And, I have to make sure that this cannabis is medically compliant, that it doesn't have any pesticides or heavy metals, like that stuff that you clearly don't want anyone to smoke, let alone your medical patients. But and so they just drop it because it's just a lot easier and a lot more profitable to just sell, cheap, mid-grade weed to unsuspecting consumers all day.
Right.
And I think the pandemic also, when in Washington State, at least, when cannabis businesses were declared essential businesses, and then the government started sending out free money to everyone, like there was this period of time for probably about 12 months where Seattle just sat at home getting baked all day on the government's nickels. So it was, it sort of shifted everyone was a medical user at that point, but it was being dispensed through the recreational market. So that was, there were a few different market factors that I think contributed to that, but I see the medical program being well enough established in at least some markets in Europe, that it could survive. You could see two highways. You could see a medical and a recreational market, without the latter just absorbing the former somewhat cynically, as what we saw in the USA and Canada. So.
I think it'll definitely. I think the medical market will definitely stay in Germany. Other countries will have to see, but based on those laws, it'll definitely remain in Germany. It's still to be seen when they roll out the recreational pilot projects where where the facilities are where people purchase it. Will people also go into a pharmacy to buy it, or will there be separate dispensaries? And I think that's, I'm sure it's under discussion, but I haven't really seen much about that. So that's still kind of up in the air. A lot of pharmacies here in Germany don't want to be involved with cannabis at all. And then definitely many do not want to be involved with recreational cannabis. Some are happy to make the money and deal with the medical cannabis, but as a whole, the pharmacists are not very supportive of the cannabis legalization process here in Germany.
Sure. And I think a lot of that presupposes still some outdated preconceptions that, medical cannabis users are just sitting there, smoking on their doobies in the back of their Volkswagen bus all day. But it begs the question in a consumer, a very rapidly evolving consumer that is looking to these products, turning their back on the whole, outdated indica sativa hybrid classification system, looking more toward, lifestyle applications of different cannabis delivery methods. I mean, you're dealing with a younger generation who is resoundingly rejecting smoking, resoundingly rejecting drinking, but they love, low potency cannabis beverages because it can give them a very light, euphoria without any associated disassociation, I guess you could say. So, it's, I think that emerging product categories also will sort of force a lot of these medical practitioners and dispensaries to sort of rethink their delivery methods, rethink how do they actually view medical cannabis and how it's most effective. It's more than just a flower and a sublingual oil. So
right. Yeah, we will have to see, also how it all works out here in Europe with the novel food regulations, which I've said it a million times, but it's almost funny. If it weren't so ridiculous, it'd be funny how they're calling cannabis a novel food, because it hasn't been consumed by humans long enough to consider it safe and, they're considering it novel and new. So, it's only probably the oldest documented substance to be consumed.
5,000 years of history. Yeah, maybe a couple more thousand. Who knows?
Right. So, the only thing that you could probably be sure humans have consumed longer would be water, air, and meat, probably. So,
maybe. Yeah.
So, so I know one thing that that you and I have talked about before is getting back onto the job side is fractional jobs. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about fractional jobs, what that is, and kind of what your involvement with that is?
Yeah, this is something that I think is fairly new in Europe, and you started seeing it emerging more on the North American side of things. But it's essentially, companies will break a 40 or a 50-hour a week executive's job into smaller, more consumable pieces. One, and you predominantly saw it in the finance space, fractional CFOs, fractional chief accountants, things of that nature, where especially for a smaller business, having a full-blown chief financial officer on your payroll as a company that maybe only has $2.5 million in revenue a year, that might be a bit excessive. That might be, swatting a fly with a bazooka, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So, but then especially in the cannabis space, you don't want to shortchange yourself with someone fresh out of undergrad either, because it's a complicated regulatory space. It's a complicated legal space. It's a very complicated accountancy space, especially in the United States. You got 280E. You've got very complex tax implications in being involved with this plan. So you can't really. It's it's a quandary, and especially in North America. You had the green rush in Canada, a slew of investment dollars just flooded into that market. They went out and got themselves the fanciest Fortune 50 executives. They're like, oh, well, if you can run Anheuser-Busch, then you can definitely run, XYZ marijuana company. And that was just an error that those of us in the industry who've been in the industry for a while saw from several clicks out. That was a disaster waiting to happen. So it was, and what you ended up with was a bunch of very successful executives getting absolutely humiliated in a market that they had no understanding of, losing their shareholders a tremendous amount of money, and getting sent away in golden parachutes with leaving behind badly abused and shell-shocked investors who now we're trying to deal with in the second wave of Europe. And the dollar signs in the eyes of investors that we saw in North America aren't quite translating into the euro signs. Because I think that North America, served as a cautionary tale for a lot of institutional investors. In light of that, you're not going to see a bunch of companies in Europe, and especially in Germany, those are reduced to the social club models, a fairly modest limit on the number of members that each can serve. So for the time being, those are going to be fairly small operations. You're not going to need, a full-blown, maybe even a full-blown marketing director, let alone a CMO. Do you need an official full-time of counsel, or do you just need access to, a very good legal advisor who might serve for other companies that doesn't represent a conflict of interest with yours? And that's where fractional advertisement comes in, is it essentially allows smaller companies with more modest needs to afford top level executives. And that's the differentiating factor right there, is it you could go out and afford a full-time executive and probably spend about the same amount, but it's a get what you pay for sort of thing. And particularly for those who are well established in the industry, we're used to stirring spoons in a lot of pots, pun intended. So it's not it's not new to us to be working on several different projects. Pros and cons. Well, I mean, there are a lot of pros. A nascent business. In my instance, a North American business might be very interested in this. I can't express any names, but there's some truism to this situation. A North American company might want to establish an initial brand presence in Europe, but they don't want to invest in a full-blown office. Well, you've got an on-the-ground executive who's well-versed in the space, who's active on the conference circuit, who can speak favorably to your company, already on the ground here. And they understand, well, I don't need to, I can hire them on a contract basis, have them as my fractional brand manager for Europe, my fractional, maybe it's a C-suite role that you need fulfilled there. It can be anything from a sales representative to a chief marketing officer. And likewise, the pandemic allowed us to work remotely on a lot of these things. So I've got clients that I work with in LA as well on concepts that they work on their domestic business development, and then I help with both strategy and European launch at the same time. So in working with several companies, it allows the hiring company to get a higher caliber of executive for a more modest price. They more than likely would be avoiding any associated medical or insurance costs. Like I'm on the European healthcare system right now. It might make a lot of Americans roll their eyes, but I'm perfectly happy with it, frankly. So, my American clients don't have to spend $75,000 extra a year on a comparatively anemic health insurance policy for them. And that's, that's savings that they can translate directly into what they pay me and what they save for their own coffers. And so essentially, like it checks a number of boxes. Like you don't have the influx of investment into Europe that we initially saw in the U.S. So it allows both foreign clients to test the waters a bit more trepidatiously or a bit more cautiously, and it allows domestic businesses to take advantage of a wellspring of North American expertise without having to worry about paying North American wages, because what an executive makes in North America versus what an executive makes in Portugal, there's a fairly vast difference. But it's also very difficult for a North American executive to just go ahead and say, oh sure, I'll settle for that wage, which frankly wouldn't even translate to an entry-level executive assistant in the US in a lot of markets. So it's not like a small compensation. It's an absolute complete lifestyle change. So from the experienced executive standpoint, if you can string together 3 or 4 serious clients who don't represent any conflict of interest from one another, everyone wins. Some of the drawbacks are, you don't have a full-time access to that employee. You've got a part-time executive. As a business starts to grow more quickly, they can find themselves rapidly outgrowing the need of a part-time executive. Easily fixed enough. You can either, if you love that executive, just buy more fractions, or work with go out and find yourself a full-blown CMO at that point. But I think that based on where the European market is compared to North America, we need to come up with some creative solutions to allow the European market to get access to the best caliber of employee. And I think that fractional executiveship is one good way to do that. So I'm very happy that EUCannaJobs has introduced itself into that space as well.
Yeah. Well, something we noticed, and it makes sense. I wouldn't even say noticed. It's just a fact. It's a young industry, relatively young. So there's a ton of startups. Most startups start off small. You don't, like you mentioned before, Europe doesn't have the kind of money being thrown at the companies like you did in Canada, where companies are starting off with $200 million in the bank, and 6 months later have $500 million, and at the end of the first year they've got $1 billion of investment, literally, and they're throwing money around like they're whatever. So here you've got startups who are doing startup struggle, looking for funding, trying to fund along the way and find investors, and they can't afford to pay for a full-time position, pay for that knowledge that they need. And Europe is even more bureaucratic and regulated than the U.S. So, and it's definitely for Germany, you have to have an accountant who knows what they're talking about. You need that even if you have a business, and you don't even need to be in the cannabis industry. You need an accountant because it's too complicated, unfortunately.
Sure.
Then, of course, if you do things wrong, then penalties and fees and things like that come on top of it, which gets super expensive very quickly.
Right.
And they're much less likely here to forgive mistakes and not charge fees and penalties. In the U.S., you can usually talk your way out of those things with the IRS or other agencies by playing dumb. Here, they're like, well, yeah, you are dumb, and it's going to cost you. A lot less forgiving here for sure. So
Absolutely.
but for EUCannaJobs, we definitely see that as a need. We have a few people like yourself and others who are available for those types of fractional positions. We actually haven't seen as much demand from the industry as we expected. But we still have those conversations, and companies are interested, even if there's not a lot of uptake at this point.
Sure.
I think that's going to be changing uh, as more companies mature and start to see what they need, and realize the advantages of something like that. I think we're going to see more and more demand for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
It makes a lot of sense for this market, I think.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to change gears. We've been talking for a bit. I wanted to bring up definitely one more thing that you've been involved in, which I find very interesting. That's NORML.
Yeah.
So I actually remember going to NORML rallies back in Atlanta, Georgia, when I was in college. So that was late 80s, early 90s. So quite a while ago, but I remember those NORML rallies. I don't remember the name of the park, but some big park where it was every year we would go, because I was going to school in Birmingham, which is 2 hours away or so. So those are always interesting. So yeah, that's how far back I can remember being involved in some of the advocacy side of it a little bit. I wasn't deeply involved, but certainly was keeping an eye on it and interested in it. But yeah, tell me what your involvement with NORML is over here now.
Sure. Well, I mean, that was a great introduction. The NORML is an acronym standing for the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, founded by attorney Keith Straw back in 1969, 1970, one of those two dates. And over the last 50 years, they have emerged as one of the leading sort of political lobbying groups for the advancement of sensible adult use cannabis laws. And that's really where North America and the way that it came about in Portugal is a friend and business partner of mine here in town. He's an attorney, US-based attorney who works remotely here in Portugal. Good work if you can get it. We were working together to try to lobby. I was actually moderating a panel that he was on as well for Canna Portugal, a trade show that we had here in Lisbon a couple years back, and we were speaking with a representative from Bloco Esquerda, the left bloc, the leading political coalition at that time, and we were trying to, position ourselves as experts in helping with write sensible legislation. And we wanted to take a look at their laws, because there were two legalization laws on the books last year in Portugal for the last session, and we wanted to add our notes and our expertise and sort of position ourselves as subject matter experts here to help. But the government collapsed in a scandalous affair, as these things don't uncommonly do in Portugal and beyond. So we lost a lot of our momentum on that. But it was odd that in spite of all of this subject matter expertise we had, we weren't, like, it didn't seem like it was really landing with a whole lot of credibility. And I met with the a few of the heads, like the head of the LA NORML chapter, and LA was where it was all originally founded. So that was the first NORML chapter. And we just started talking about, what are the implications of having a NORML chapter outside of North America? And come to find out, there already is one in France. So the Portuguese NORML chapter would be the second NORML chapter in Europe, and and that's what the mission for NORML is in North America: is the advancement of sensible adult use legislation. So that people can essentially have the freedom to consume what they want to consume when it comes to cannabis. And we're taking a decidedly different approach to that mission here in Portugal. And we are the articles of association are already done. I opted on a 7-member board of directors, and because of the dynamics of that board, it's caused a little bit of storming in the formulation process. So I should meet, hopefully, to pin down my 7th board member on the 11th of September, and then we're off to the races. The articles are filed, and NORML Portugal is born. But the reason that board has been a bit of a challenge to curate is we opted to bring a really diverse group of voices to the table for NORML Portugal. And it's specifically because of that that much more robustly established medical market, that much more robustly established. This maybe is a bit of a misnomer, but a more established, textile market as well that really needs a lot more support, an adult use market and things of that nature. So, the board represents people from big medical cannabis, represents people from big hemp, represents people from political walks of life, represents people from Madeira and the Azores, represents legal and advocacy. So we're really bringing all these different voices to the table. And one of the main drives behind this is like, if we're going to really have meaningful legislation that preserves these delightfully bifurcated markets, like you've got the medical over here and the recreational over here, never the twain shall meet. Let's try to preserve that, because that's one of the mistakes that we made in North America, is killing our medical markets. So another big snafu that we had in North America was the exalted 2018 Farm Bill. Everyone thought, oh my gosh, hemp is legalized, everything's going to be good. And then all of a sudden you had the hemp-derived frankencannabinoids, the hemp-derived Delta-9 THC, the hemp-derived HHC that you see all over the place throughout Europe. Not necessarily, it can be argued that that's not necessarily the healthiest stuff to consume, especially in the face of, naturally produced cannabinoids out of cannabis plants. So it's a bit of a challenge, and it caused a great deal of strife between big cannabis and big hemp. So what we're trying to say is, if we're going to really do this right in Europe, if we're going to craft meaningful legislation that we don't end up, stepping on the rake and having the stick hit us in the face, let's make sure that all of the voices are voicing their concerns in advance, and maybe we avoid some of the pitfalls like we had after the Farm Bill of 2018. Maybe we'd avoid some of the infighting that we see among different stakeholders within a market where, frankly, peaceful coexistence is far easier than conflict. So it's a bit of a different approach. We're not just looking at the legislation from the standpoint of adult use or recreational. We're looking at the whole plant and how different stakeholders representing different applications of this incredibly versatile gift of a plant that we have, from fuel to food to clothing to industrial textiles to medicine to recreational relaxation, to incense, to surface cleaners. I mean, to aerospace, to graphene batteries. Like, we could just sit here for hours talking about the different implications of cannabis. And if a number of different voices are sitting at the same table outlining their specific needs, it gives us a lot better opportunity, I think, to come up with legislation that, and it's never going to be perfect out of the gate. I'm not trying to say that it is. It's always a stew that you're trying to cook. But I think that we can dial in the ingredients a little bit better on the first go, as opposed to doing what we did in Washington, spending the last 12 years frantically trying to change the laws that we spent so hard that we spent so much time trying to pass in the first place. So that's where NORML Europe, NORML Portugal really differentiates from their North American counterpart. But the reception so far has been incredibly uplifting from both the political and stakeholder standpoint. So I'm super excited that NORML it's finally going to get its wings this month, and we'll be able to start doing some serious good. So I'm happy with the doors that's already opened, and the conversations that it's already facilitated, and we're just at the starting line on that. So super excited about NORML Portugal. We should have a website, normal.pt, up and running by mid-October.
Okay. Right. I was about to ask how people can find more information about that, but yeah, of course, they
It's
go to the regular normal site now just to kind of see what they're about in the U.S.
of
But
course
yeah,
normal.org or normal.fr if you want to check out what Normal's doing in France. They're still also really more focused on the adult use side of it, but we're really looking forward to collaborating with folks over in Paris as well. So
yeah. And just to remind everyone, that's NORML. There's no A in there, so NORML for normal. .DEFR or org, depending on which one you're looking at. Well, yeah, so let's wrap things up here, Eric, since we've been talking for 45 minutes. It goes fast. We could keep talking, but
you put a nickel in me, I'll keep going until you take me down.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's all very interesting, so it's easy for me to just sit here and talk forever too. So how can people get in touch with you, Eric, if they want to talk to you about anything in particular? We mentioned how to find NORML, but if they want to talk to you or get in touch with you directly?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, LinkedIn's always the best way. I think that's where a lot of the cannabis community reaches out. So maybe we can it's just LinkedIn /Boone Eric, BOONE ERIC. enboone@gmail.com is always. I'm not going to share my business address. It's way too complicated, but maybe we can drop those in the comments as well. So
sure.
Always happy to receive any email. But ping me on LinkedIn or send me an email directly. I'd always welcome to offer advice or hear about any opportunities to collaborate. So that's how it works in this industry. When you're trying to build a whole new global commodity industry, essentially from the ground up, it requires a lot of people to wear a lot of different hats. And
definitely.
But I'm so excited. It's been an honor to really kind of help bring that baby into the world in North America, and to be able to potentially repeat and even better yet, learn from some of the mistakes made over the last 15 years. It's really exciting to be here in Europe as well. So let's go.
Great. Well, thanks for being here today, Eric. And thanks to everyone who tuned in for this episode of EUCannaJobs Podcast. Hope you enjoyed our time with Eric. I think he's an inspiration with everything that he's been involved in, how long he's been involved in the industry. Also his move from the U.S. to Europe and all around, and still being an advocate. There's, like he just said, a lot of different hats to be worn, a lot of room for people to get into the industry. And once you're in the industry, a lot of people change kind of what they're doing. A lot of times you're doing 10 things instead of, wearing 10 hats instead of the one that you thought you were going to. So it's a great industry to be in, very exciting. So for everyone else, if you want to get in touch with us, you can find us on our website, EUCannaJobs.com. Follow us on LinkedIn, where we do just about daily updates, if not twice a day. You can also sign up for a newsletter. Appreciate everyone joining us today. Stay informed, stay curious, and enjoy the cannabis industry, everyone.
Thank you.